Tony D and Little Joan with a screenwriter's rant on Snow White and the 7 politically correct people who aren't dwarves but a diverse set of rainbow people. Smash like and subscribe. Thank you for smash liking and subscribing. Check out my books. Links in the description. Comedy Horror in South Jersey. It's the Pineys, books 1 through 11. Available at Amazon.com. Don't forget, Kindle Unlimited is free. Book 12 dropping soon. Now, why is this happening again and again? Well, part of it is the wokeness. But there's more to it than that, I believe. And this goes back to what I keep saying about how comic books have corrupted the movie industry in a weird way. The movie people are following the comic book model. What you have to understand, and this is according to the people I knew in the comic book industry and about royalties. Royalties in comics didn't happen initially, or they were very low. And, so they were creating all these characters, right? If you look at a price guide for comic books, you would see first appearance, first appearance, first appearance, first appearance, first appearance for like the first 50 or 60, 100 issues. And they were just creating. And that's what I do with my books and the Pineys, right? I just keep adding new characters. I don't feel the need to keep bringing characters back. I like to create new characters and new situations for my main characters to, encounter. But in these big companies now, these big corporate companies, my understanding is that the lawyers run the show and they don't want to fill out the paperwork for every new character you come up with on a whim. There's just they want to control the money. They want to control that character in case he's a big deal. And so they just don't want to fill out the paperwork. So they have a giant library of characters. So what they do is they go back in time and say, no, take one of the old characters and just completely revamp them. It's not so really they could save paperwork. It's because those characters created back in the day, up until, I guess, around the 70s, they didn't really have a strong royalty situation. But they own so many characters already that they do own outright. They don't have to pay any royalties on them. It's cheaper for them if you just bring those back in a new way, because they'll own them lock, stock, and barrel, even if you redesign them, my understanding. But then in the 70s, they did institute a fairer royalty payment. They were trying to help the guys who created Superman. They weren't getting jack, and Superman was making millions and millions and millions of dollars. So the same thing, I think, has kind of happened in movies. They've done the same thing. I've heard from people who worked in the industry, they just get a big book of IPs and they go through them and they say, what can we remake? What can we use? We already own these properties. They're just sitting there. They're our assets, and they're just sitting there not making us more money. Snow White is one of those assets at Disney. So, and it's, the original story's in the public domain, so anybody can make their own version of Snow White. So it's not just that they're making them woke and woke-tarded. It's, Paul Joseph Watson just did a video. He's like, why bother remaking this? The characters aren't dwarves. It's Snow White and the 7 dwarves. Like, why even bother? Why not just make a completely different story? Well, the answer is they don't own a completely different story. If they hire a guy like me or anybody else to write a completely new story, they got to pay us royalties forever. Because under the new system, you would get quite a good amount of royalties, especially if it was a hit. You have to keep paying and paying and paying and paying. Hollywood doesn't want to keep paying and paying and paying. They're in business. So the idea would be, well, we won't have to pay as many royalties. So we definitely could cut out the writer, because the writer on this movie probably gets paid a lower amount because he's not the creator. It's just you're working on our IP. We own Snow White and the 7 magical creature companions, or whatever the hell they're calling them. So it's partly that. It's partly just a money decision. This is partly why they just keep cranking out the same thing over and over again. That's why so many reboots are on the horizon. I just read they're going to redo Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I don't think it's Disney, but whoever created Mr. and Mrs. Smith. You remember the Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie movie? They've recast it with Donald Glover and some black actress, I don't know. So, and you might say, oh, they're doing another race swap. Yeah, I mean, they're getting their ESG, but it's also because you already know that. You already know who Mr. and Mrs. Smith are. It's a known quantity. And business people, they want known quantities because from their perspective, that is a win, right? If I am making different flavors of potato chips, right? If I run Lay's and they did this thing where they did different potato chip flavors. If I come up with new flavors, it might not be a hit. You could put a whole bunch of money and advertising dollars into it and it could be a complete flop. But if I bring back cheddar and onion or sour cream and onion or whatever, all these classic flavors in a new bag, people love it. It's guaranteed money. It's kind of the same thing. There's a certain amount of guaranteed money in rebooting Snow White or Mr. and Mrs. Smith or whatever because people have heard of it. You don't have to advertise it as much. But in my view, the studios are so off the rails. They're so off the reservation. They're still spending the same amount of money had they made an original movie anyway. The money they're saving is negligible compared to the money they're losing. They're going to lose big on this movie. Who the hell wants to see this? And it's poor Rachel Zegler. Rachel Zegler, if you don't remember, was in the reboot of West Side Story, directed by Steven Spielberg, which bombed. I think I could safely say that movie bombed. Totally another unnecessary remake, a totally unnecessary movie in my view. You're remaking a classic movie. Why? Oh, they put representation in it, don't you worry. That's probably not why it bombed. It bombed partly because nobody gives a crap about musicals anymore, but mostly because you have the classic. Anybody can see it. It's around. There's millions of copies, literally millions of copies on video, DVD, places to download. It's getting older and older. They want to keep the trademark active, so maybe they lose the original trademark. But the new trademark is on the remake, so they still own it. Maybe this is another version of that. They want to keep the trademark on Snow White for their classic stuff, but here they're renewing it. So they have a new trademark on these characters, which are Snow White, but, you know, possibly the classic characters will be able to be, remade by other people. They might go into the public domain. That might be part of it, too. But ultimately, no one cares. What are you actually saving here? Who in the corporate structure is like, oh, we got to save Snow White. We got to save Snow White. This is a known quantity. This is ours. This is ours. This is ours. But being yours doesn't matter anymore. Everything on the internet gets memed to death. People post clips and stills and all kinds of crazy things. Hell, people could take this movie, re-edit it, make their own version of it. They could make this movie in like a video game. People have done that. They could animate it. And they could just do Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. They couldn't do the look that Disney trademarked. They'd have to change the look. But so what? You can go back to the original. Everybody's doing Thor. You can do Thor all day long. Anybody can do their own version of Thor. You just can't do Marvel's Mighty Thor. You can't make them look like the comic book Chris Hemsworth versions. But this, come on, man. This just cracked me the F up. I mean, Jesus. What an absolute clown show. And for the record, again, dwarves are magical creatures. So they're not playing humans when you play dwarves. I know some people call little people dwarves or whatever, and that's an actual term. But in the context of this story, dwarves are like the dwarves in Lord of the Rings. So Gimli was a dwarf. These guys are a dwarf. They're dwarves. It's supposed to be a fantasy world. They're supposed to be fantasy magical characters. It's perfectly fine to say dwarves because you're not saying little people are midgets. You're saying dwarves, the fantastical creatures that exist in fantasy. Ugh. Can you imagine the boardroom meetings that happened over this? Can you imagine how dopey the people are who approved this and greenlit this thing and said, oh yeah, people will watch this? Who? Who is this even for? The Snow White movie came out ages ago, and it was a kids movie meant for kids in, like, I don't know, 50s or 60s, whenever the hell Snow White came out. Who is this aimed at? It doesn't look like it's aimed at children. Do you think children care about the diversity? You think people of various racial backgrounds, their children, are just clamoring to say, oh, daddy, daddy, please take us to see Snow White and the Seven Magical Creatures? Kids literally will see anything. Literally will see anything. There's a few IPs they may or may not know. They've seen on television, something like Barney or Teletubbies or whatever. But this hasn't been on TV in, I don't know, 40, 50 years? I mean, I think they used to show the old Snow White movie on TV back in the day. I don't remember the last time I saw it. Probably 40 years ago. So, who is it? You're telling me this is for kids? Kids don't know this. You're telling me Rachel Zegler has a fan base? For what? West Side Story, a movie that didn't do well? She didn't even get invited to the Oscars that year. She had to raise a stink. I think they eventually invited her, though. That was weird. This whole thing is weird. Why would you do this? For ESG? You could have made literally any movie for ESG. You could have made a more ESG movie than this and gotten your ESG. Do you get extra points for ruining some classic? Is that how ESG works? Oh, you're ruining a classic. Well, you get double for that. There, you get double. There's your points, Disney. For what? What good is it doing you? What good is the ESG if your company goes down the tubes? There are rumors that you're going to be selling the parks in 3 years, that you could be jettisoning ABC. How is this helping your company? How is having access to these extra loans and money helping you if your actual business doesn't work anymore? Just asking questions, Disney. Couldn't happen to a nicer company. And that's it for me, Tony D and Little Joan. Check us out on Odysee, Bitchute, and Rumble for our more base take. If you can find a more base take than that, I say take it. I'll be at the Clement Farms Blueberry Festival tomorrow from 10 to 3, where you can pick blueberries. Delicious. And then on Sunday at the Dragon Boat Races, rain or shine, hopefully no rain, at the Camden County Boathouse. Hope to see you there, and we'll see you